In a world tired of familiar political scenarios, a real shock occurred. In the Japanese elections, Sanai Takaichi won, the first female prime minister in the country's history. A victory that was expected to symbolize toughness and nationalism turned into a political upheaval. She had been expected to deliver strong anti-China rhetoric, strengthen the alliance with the United States, boost Japan's military power, and contain Beijing. But the opposite happened. In her first major address to the nation, Takaichi announced that Japan would not support the US trade war against China and would not become an instrument of economic pressure. Moreover, she openly criticized Donald Trump's tariff policy, calling it the most dangerous mistake of the 21st century. These words struck like thunder. According to Reuters, the White House did not expect anything like it. Washington was convinced that Takaichi's victory would strengthen the anti-China front, as that had been the core of her campaign. But everything changed at the last moment. After taking office, Sanai Takaichi held a series of secret consultations with Japan's largest corporations, from Toyota and Sony to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and heard the same message: Japan's economy would not survive another trade war. And just 1 week after her inauguration, she did what no one expected. She openly expressed support for China. The Economist called it the biggest foreign policy shift in Japan since the end of the Second World War. According to analysts from Nikkei Asia, this decision was driven by cold calculation. Takaichi fully understands that Japan lives by exports and China is its largest market. Any tariffs imposed by the United States hit not only China but Japan itself, since Japanese corporations have spent decades building their supply chains in China. So when Trump announced 100% tariffs on Chinese goods, Japanese business found itself caught between two fires. And now, for the first time in many decades, Tokyo has decided to follow its own interests rather than Washington's. In her address to Parliament, Takaichi said that Japan would not be a pawn in someone else's game, that the country respects the United States but also respects China, and that a new era in Asia has arrived. For the United States, this came as a shock. Donald Trump responded by saying that Japan had betrayed the principles of free trade and that his administration would review all agreements with Tokyo. American media launched a wave of criticism. CNN called Takaichi's move a stab in the back of an ally. In Congress, talk began about a possible US withdrawal from the Mutual Defense Treaty with Japan. But in Japan, the statement had the opposite effect. In a country where the United States had long been seen as a guarantor of security, people began to speak of independence for the first time. NHK World conducted a poll. More than 60% of Japanese people supported Takaichi's course and her pursuit of Eastern diplomacy based on equality with China. Young people call her the prime minister of a new generation, the one who dared to challenge American dependence. The political shift immediately affected the economy. The yen strengthened, the Chinese yuan also rose, and the US dollar slightly weakened. Bloomberg Economics reports that Japan has begun discussing the possibility of creating a common currency zone with China and South Korea for intra-Asian settlements. This would effectively mean a partial exit from the dollar system. Analysts at Nikkei Asia write that Sanai Takaichi has chosen a strategy of Asian autonomy, building an economic space independent from the West. In an interview with Yomiuri Shimbun, she said that Japan can be a bridge between East and West, but it will no longer depend on the West. Washington responded harshly. Trump instructed the Department of Commerce to prepare a new package of sanctions against Japanese companies supplying electronics and cars to the United States. But according to Politico, even inside the president's circle, concern is growing. The alliance with Japan is collapsing, and this is happening for the first time since the Second World War. One State Department analyst said that if Japan steps out of the shadow of the United States, the entire Asian balance will collapse. All of this is happening amid a rapid shift in public opinion in Japan itself. A country that for decades viewed China as a strategic threat now sees it as a partner. According to a Kyodo News poll, more than half of Japanese respondents believe that in an era of tariffs and protectionism, it is necessary to look for allies in Asia, not across the ocean. Experts say the decisive factor was the economy. In 2024, Japanese exports to China reached a record $180 billion, and Chinese investments in Japan grew by 40%. After Trump introduced tariffs on Chinese and Japanese goods, the American market stopped being profitable, and Japanese corporations began to reorient rapidly toward the east. In Tokyo, they now speak of a new realism. Sanae Takaichi explains her policy simply: America protects itself. Japan will protect itself too. She emphasizes that this is not a pro-Russian or pro-Chinese course, but a Japanese path. But everyone understands that in practice, Japan is betting on China. The International Monetary Fund is already discussing the consequences. Bloomberg Intelligence claims that if Japan and China integrate their financial markets and production chains, the dollar could lose up to 15% of global liquidity. This would be the biggest shift in the past 50 years. While the United States looks for ways to bring Japan back into its camp, Takaichi is consolidating power at home. Her approval ratings surpass those of all her predecessors. She is being called the Japanese Margaret Thatcher, but with an Asian face. Even the opposition in parliament has to admit that for the first time in many years, Japan is speaking not on behalf of America, but on its own behalf. Meanwhile, in China, she is treated with respect. Global Times writes that Sanae Takaichi is a rare leader who understands that Asia must be united. Chinese investors have already begun buying Japanese bonds, and the Tokyo stock market is experiencing unprecedented growth. But in Washington, the mood is grim. A report by CSIS states directly that if Japan moves closer to China, the US-Asian strategy will collapse. This will be the end of the era of American dominance in the Pacific. According to The Guardian, Trump held a closed meeting with the military to discuss a review of the US presence in Okinawa. Even among American allies, there is growing understanding that the world has changed. Europe, preoccupied with its own crises, is not rushing to intervene. And in Seoul, according to Yonhap News, the South Korean government is considering joining the Asian Economic Corridor if it is actually created. The world before our eyes is becoming different. Japan, a country that for decades depended on the will of the United States, is now creating its own strategic course. Neither Western nor Eastern, but strategically neutral and clearly leaning toward Beijing. The Economist calls this the era of a quiet Asian revolution. This is why many experts see Takaichi as a figure of historic scale. She is not just the first woman to become Japan's prime minister. She has become a symbol of the new Asian century. In a world where tariffs have replaced guns and trade has become a battlefield, she chose not a side, but a direction. And that direction leads east. The United States now faces a choice it was not prepared for. Either it adapts to the new reality and accepts Japan as an equal partner, or it watches as one of its oldest allies becomes a pillar of a new Asian order. As Financial Times writes, in 2025, the world finally realized that old alliances no longer work. Where America sees a threat, Asia sees an opportunity. And at the center of this opportunity stands Japan, a country that once followed the United States and now walks alongside China.